Welcome into another season, another edition of Pete's Pigskin Preview presented by Meadowbrook Wealth Advisors of Raymond James. I'm Neil McCready. That is MPW Digital football expert Pete DeWeese, back for, I guess this is what, Pete, a third season, a fourth season, third season?
I think third season of this format. Yeah.
I think that's right. Third season. So Ole Miss, as highly anticipated a season since I've been on the beat. I think it's the most highly anticipated season based on rankings since 1970, which was the year that I was born. I do not remember that season. Sorry. Ole Miss opened that season, I think, fifth in the country. This year, the Rebels are opening the season ranked number 6 in both the Associated Press poll and the coaches poll. I know polls don't mean anything. Whatever. That's where they're ranked. So they opened the season at 6 p.m. on Saturday against the Furman Paladins. I made the mistake, Pete, for whatever reason. I was in a hurry on Tuesday, and I was trying to get a notebook to the people before I had to tape an edition of McCready and Siskey. And I don't know why, but I referred to Furman as Mercer. I was tarred and feathered, and it was bad. I was lit up. I was told that it was sloppy, which I agreed, but I was in a hurry. And frankly, if we're still talking about Mercer or Furman on Sunday, there's a problem. So
there's a big problem. Well, you were just thinking about the first preview show we did last year and had that fresh on your mind. I'm sure that's all that was.
Was it Mercer last year? Because
I think
at one point last year I called Mercer Furman. So I don't know why I interchanged the two schools.
Both fine academic institutions, not too far apart, but not exactly the same.
I harbor no ill will to either of them. It's just a simple mistake, and I apologize for that transgression on Tuesday afternoon, and I hope that everyone who was offended by it has subsequently recovered. We are brought to you this season by Meadowbrook Wealth Advisors of Raymond James. It's a full-service investment team based in Jackson, Mississippi, providing financial planning and investment management to clients across the state and surrounding areas. Ryan Geary and his partners are a local team that utilize the strength and resources of a national firm to bring their clients an impeccable level of service. This includes access to investment strategies and portfolio managers not available to all investors. If you are interested in a no-obligation consultation or just want to be added to their monthly market update email list, reach out to financial advisor Ryan Geary with Meadowbrook Wealth Advisors of Raymond James at 601-368-2215 or ryan.geary, that's ryan.geary at raymondjames.com. Raymond James and Associates Incorporated, member New York Stock Exchange, SIPC. I'll tell you real quickly that I'm coming to you from the Clark Ford Studios. Clark Ford is in Amory, Mississippi, 662-257-1900 is that number. Call our buddy Corey Clark. Tell Corey what Ford product you're looking for. He'll send you a quote within 15 minutes in business hours. It's right to the bottom line. There's not going to be any hassle. There's no haggle. He's going to give you a quote. You can shop it around. You can do what I've done multiple times, what I recommend that you do. You'll be thrilled with yourself and the product if you do it, and that's hop into a Clark Ford today. Again, 662-257-1900. All right, Pete, let's mostly talk about Ole Miss for a few minutes because this is a new roster, a lot of transfers, specifically on the defensive side of the ball. We talked about it. I think if people want to go back ever and watch Pete's Pigskin preview from last season before the Ole Miss game at Georgia, you were prescient. You were kind. You were subtle. You tried to soften it. But you warned people that this could be ugly up front, that for Ole Miss, the path to victory was a very complicated trek through dark forest, basically, that it was going to be difficult because Georgia was so good up front. Lane Kiffin, even before that game, said as much, and after that game was very frank about it and said, if we're going to get to that level, we have to look more like them. And they made that the priority going into the offseason, even before the offseason began, really, before the Peach Bowl, when Ole Miss beat Penn State, the focus was totally on rebuilding both lines of scrimmage. And it was it was the focus. I'm curious to get your thoughts on how well you think they did in terms of closing that gap.
You know, I haven't seen many of the guys in person, obviously, and I'm curious to see what a lot of them look like, in this roster just in general. But they've certainly added size and talent on the defensive side of the ball. There is no denying if they stay healthy, they will be an improved unit. There were successful pieces last year, but to go out and get some proven playmakers, but then to also add depth of guys that produced at not everybody was from Florida or Texas A&M, but to be able to go out and add guys that produced at some level, and produced at a clip that made them, not just a desirable athlete for Ole Miss, but for a lot of programs around the country, to be able to go pull those guys in just completely overhauls your depth. On the offensive line side of the ball, my understanding is I think there's some injuries up front right now, and what the middle of that line is going to look like in particular is going to be interesting. But there's no question. And specifically as it references Georgia, I living in Georgia, coaching in Georgia, being involved with so many different guys that follow Georgia, and even having coached with guys that have played there, and seeing the kids that I get to coach and the kids I get to face on a Friday night, and kind of knowing where they end up. I mean, when Kiffin comes out of that game and says we don't look like them, it's a real thing. I remember when I first got to Ole Miss, and we're talking, it's Deuce McAllister, Romero Miller, Grant Hurd. Those were the seniors that year, and that was my first year. And standing on that sideline, it was early in the season. It was a night game against Auburn, if I remember correctly. And I looked out, and I looked at our kickoff return to open the game, and I looked at their kickoff team, and I thought, the guys they have running downfield to cover this kick are a hell of a lot bigger than the guys we have trying to block them. And that was the first time that my eyes went, this is different, right? And so obviously, when you're trying to play at the high level that Ole Miss is striving to be, your roster has to reflect that. And so it is clear in who they signed that they made it a priority, keeping those guys healthy and getting them to gel together, especially on the offensive side of the ball. I do think you're going to see some major shifts through preparation for this. I went back and watched, a little bit from last season, and I rewatched the bowl game. And you watched that offensive line, who was effective. But if you really watch that game, Penn State, who has a very good defensive front, that front was not just completely nullified. They got pressure. They were in the backfield. They hit Dart a couple of times. And so knowing if they want to stay at that level, that's what they're going to have to do. As an Ole Miss fan, I think you have to be excited about, they made it known this is our priority. And right now, from the outside looking in, it certainly looks like they were able to capitalize on that.
Yeah, the offensive line to me is the most interesting part of this team, because I agree with you completely. The defensive line, I've had the benefit of seeing a little practice, not much, but a little. I'm not the guy that's complaining about it. I've seen enough to kind of get a feel for what different areas sort of look like. The defensive line is very talented. It's deep. And that's without really Princely Umanmielen participating that much, because he's coming back from a labrum injury and they're being careful. Let's face it, if they lose one of these first 4 games without Umanmielen, it wasn't going to be what people were hoping it was going to be anyway. That just is what it is. So they've got another month before they really need him. And if you're listening, I did air quotes, need, underline, italicized, bold. But Walter Nolan's a difference maker. JJ Pegues is a big guy. I think people don't completely understand how big Jared Ivey is. The young guys are big. Chris Hardy's a very effective guy off the edge that we really haven't talked a whole lot about, because he gets kind of lost in the shuffle a little bit in terms of publicity. Defensive line's going to be really good. It's going to be a strength of the team. And man, if you're going to have a strength of the team in SEC, that's a good place to have one.
Listen, you better build the team up the middle, and I think, just not to take away from your point, but if you're Jared Ivey or you're JJ Pegues, you have to be excited because they're two guys that they were successful last year when they were the best two players on the defensive front.
Yeah.
At this point, you can't double team them, and you have to. There's other guys on that front that are going to cause problems, and it's going to free those guys up in pass rush opportunity in the run game. So yeah, absolutely. I'm probably I'm with you. Offensive line is the most interesting position. D line is the one I'm most anticipating. That's the one I want to see.
So I get a question a lot about when I say I have some question marks about the offensive line, and I just do, right? Because they brought in Diego Pounds from North Carolina. Jaden Williams apparently has beaten him out, which could be a reflection about Williams taking the next step. Young offensive linemen sometimes take big leaps in year 3. That happens. I think we forget that in this transfer portal era of you bring a guy in and you plug and play and you go. There is still, I always hate saying stuff like this because it's not like I'm speaking, like giving speeches, but like guys do develop from 20 to 21, 19 to 20. There is maturation. The lights come on. You realize, oh, I do have to work harder. It's different. Guys are just, forget football for a minute. Remember when you were 20? You were probably kind of screwed up. And at 21, you start to go, okay, well, I probably need to do this a little better. Maybe I need to do this a little better. And if I'm going to get a job, I probably need to get my grades a little better. If I'm going to keep impressing this girl, I probably need to, I don't know, be a little more on time, whatever the case may be, right? I think that certainly applies to football too.
There's a couple ways to look at it. And I think a lot of people, when they hear that, might think that, okay, they bring Pounds in and maybe they missed, right? With the portal, one advantage you have, and especially the way Ole Miss devotes a lot of time and energy and have had a lot of success in the portal, there's so much more room for quality evaluation in so many ways than there is for a high school player.
Yeah.
Right. In the days of signing all high school offensive linemen, and I remember, my last semester at Ole Miss when Orgeron was the head coach, and I spent a lot of time in the recruiting offices and watching film. It's hard to grade a guy that plays in a wing T offense in high school and understand how's he going to handle pass rush at the next level. And it's now there may be more film, and high school offenses may have evolved a little bit more, but it's still the 6'8", 330-pound kid going over versus the 6'1", 220-pound kid. Where with Pounds, that's not the case. You're evaluating him against Power 4 talent. And so for him to come in and not be the guy initially often is more likely, in my opinion, in this day and age, more a sign of the maturation and development of the guy that beat him out, more so than it is the possible missed evaluation by the staff. And I think you're spot on. Especially a guy that may have come in and played a lot early and then kind of fallen out of grace a little bit. Sometimes you play early because of necessity and you get the big head because you're 18, 19 years old. And then, things change and you get sour and you're living life in Oxford where, come on, you're a college kid in Oxford. And then all of a sudden, now you're right. You're 21 years old and you're in that third year and your approach to the business that you're in has changed. That's very much a real thing. But the fact that you have a guy like Pounds that maybe next guy in, right, a guy that has played meaningful snaps,
having a little technical issue right here. This happens. Go ahead. There, he's back. We had a little connectivity issue there for a second, so all good. Go ahead.
Well, just saying, the fact that you have a guy that has played meaningful snaps in a Power 4 conference that's now coming in and is your sixth guy or your seventh guy. It wasn't the case in the past, right? It was guys that were unproven. And so you talk about the goal to change the roster and change how you look. Part of that is also experience. And so it is interesting to see when you bring those guys in and there's no telling what promises are made and what the NIL check looks like, and then they're not the guy. if you can manage the locker room aspect of that, it just gives you so much more depth and in a lot of ways so much more versatility up front to have
Well,
that experience waiting.
and to prove your point, I mean, already the Ole Miss has, obviously, as we record this, has not played a game yet, and they're already kind of down a couple of offensive linemen. Jarquan Scott was injured in the second scrimmage. He was probably their most consistent interior offensive lineman early. Appeared to be the starting center. Caleb Warren, who's played a ton of football at Ole Miss, got hurt. We believe that he had meniscus surgery earlier in the week. I know for a fact he was scoped. There's, he's probably not playing Saturday. I feel confident saying that. I'd be surprised if Scott plays either. And so suddenly you dip into that depth. They brought in Nate Calippo and Julius Buelow. They call him Juice. Ole Miss has like 7 juices, the dog and then the receiver and then the offensive lineman. So there's a lot of juices out there. So you have to kind of specify which juice you're referencing. Julius,
Big juice, little juice, fast juice.
Yeah, that's probably right. Well, and Juice the dog might contest. He might say, well, I'm fast. Although right now he's laid up.
He's lost 6 isn't he on the IR right now?
He is the only person. He is the only individual on the team whose injury status has been made public. He's doubtful for Saturday. But I mean, they brought in those guys, and look, they're all big, and they all have played fairly high level college football. The 2 kids from Washington played in the national championship game back in January. So that's pretty high level college football. So they've brought those guys in. They still have Micah Pettis, who I think is about to take a big leap forward because again, to the maturity thing, Micah will tell you that he wasn't particularly the most mature guy early in his Ole Miss career. And I think some of that has changed, and I think he's a far more mature player moving forward. He's always been big and dominant with the mean streak, but sometimes the mean streak got him in trouble in the past, and I think he's been able to channel that a little bit better as he prepares for games. So, to me, Pete, it's the one area, right, that if you tell me, hey, the offensive line makes a big leap, I go, okay, well, this thing's possible, right? And if you tell me, no, they really don't, because look, I'll be the guy that says this, and everybody gets mad at me for it, but that's okay. I do think they're going to miss Quinshon Judkins, the running back, not the person, not the people around him, not his mom, but on Saturday, and you go back to the Peach Bowl, as pissed off as they were at Quinshon Judkins that day, they gave him the ball 34 times.
They kept putting him back in.
They leaned on him, and so I do think that's a key thing for this team. How do you replace the running back? Not just with personnel. Maybe they throw it more. Maybe they do. Maybe they're so much better on defense that they don't need it as much. But I do think it's a thing that leaves this void that you do have to fill to some degree if you're going to be a national championship contender.
Yeah, it is hard to say that you're not going to miss the production that kid had. I mean, he was phenomenal while he was in Oxford on the field, in particularly carrying the football. If you can't replace man for man that individual, then it has to be about what's around him. And obviously in the run game, offensive line is such a massive part of that. Ole Miss is always going to live in an RPO world. They're either going to be reading somebody for the quarterback to run, or they're going to be reading somebody for the quarterback to throw. And that's going to continue to be a big part of who they are offensively. I don't see it changing. I am curious to see the distribution of carry and the distribution of roles in particular as things go on in the backfield. That they have a couple of bigger bodies that can service them when they need it. I do think, obviously Bentley has the ability to create big plays. I think they see the same thing in Parrish. So I'm very curious. And honestly, one of my biggest questions is early on is from a pass protection standpoint, are they going to try to get the back out and release him more and trust Jackson Dart and the offensive line to manage protection and to be able to adjust and handle different looks? Or are we going to be a situation where there is somebody, maybe it's one guy, the NFL model
I'll say this while we're getting some connectivity things worked out. One of the things that I'm interested in,
So,
one of the things I'm interested in the running game is the two tight ends. Last year, they were so dependent on Prescorn, and then he missed half the season basically before he was healthy. This year, he's really healthy. He's clearly the starter, don't get me wrong, but Daquan Wright really looks the part, was a very good player at Virginia Tech. And Hudson Wolf has missed some time. He's always had some injury issues. I don't know that you can pencil him in or ink him in as a guy that you can count on, because this isn't a criticism of him. It's just he's been hurt a lot. And so at some point that becomes a thing. But if they can use Prescorn and Wright effectively together, I think that does give them an option offensively that they didn't have a year ago.
That's one of the big things to me. And I know this was a conversation on the board not recently, maybe in the last week, where people talked about, are we going to get together a lot? Because doing that, you take somebody from that talented receiving core and you take them off the field. So, I would love nothing more than to be able to play an entire game with two dynamic tight ends on almost every snap. There's so much it can do for an offense. But I got curious, and since Kiffin has been at Ole Miss, there have not been really any stretches where they've had two healthy, dominant, or serviceable is not the right word, but two really viable options on the roster, healthy at the same time at tight end. And so I went back and I did some digging, and I went all the way back to 2016 Alabama, his last year as the offensive coordinator there. And I watched some film from that season, and just, Jalen Hurts was the quarterback. But you're looking at, part of the conversation with Ole Miss's roster is, okay, you're taking a talented receiver off the field. Well, that was, Calvin Ridley was a first-round draft pick receiver on that team. Ardarius Stewart was a third-round draft pick that was an all-SEC caliber player that was on that team. Trayvon Diggs, that ended up being a second-round draft pick, was a young receiver. There was talent at the receiver position. Despite that, you had O.J. Howard, first-round draft pick at tight end. You had Miller Forstall, who spent 2 years in the league. You had Hell Hintkes, I don't even know how to pronounce it, spent 2 years in the league. You had a wealth of bodies on the tight end, and Kiffin spent a solid portion of the couple of games that I watched with two tight ends on the field. And he did it because a lot of those guys, every player carries a different skill set. No two tight ends are built the same. And they may both be good route runners, and they may be both, but Wright and Prescorn, they're not the same player from everything that I've seen. So going back and looking at that 2016, even going back to 2015 when he had, Derrick Henry and Kenyon Drake, he was still playing with two tight ends a lot. And some of that, I'm sure, had to do with who he had in the backfield. But also understanding how tight ends affect structure and what it does to the defense. And so I am going to share a screen.
Go for it.
For a few minutes, because it's the one thing I shared tonight. So can you see the PowerPoint or the presentation, or is it
there? It is right there. Yep, right there.
Right.
Yep.
Beautiful. So just kind of some basic football, kind of background.
I am going to interrupt you right here real quick, just for the listener. If you're listening to this podcast and you want to, especially moving forward into the season, as we start getting into some other opponents, when we start getting into the Kentucky, South Carolina, LSU, Oklahoma portion of the schedule, watch on YouTube. I know some people don't really like to watch on YouTube. This is a show that is better enjoyed on YouTube. If you want to listen and only listen, quite frankly, we make more money that way. Cool. I'm good with it. Awesome. Thank you. But if you really want to enjoy this show, and as you get ready to go to the game or watch the game or whatever the case may be, this is a show that is better enjoyed on YouTube. End of speech.
I try to explain things and make it as visual as I can, just narrating. But yeah, anytime we can use diagrams or we can use film, we try to bring it to the table. So, tonight it was as simple as diagrams, right? And just kind of some football 101 to get us back rolling into the season. But I really wanted to focus on the advantage of being able to play with two tight ends when Ole Miss wants to. So when offenses and defenses talk about personnel structure, what's kind of universally referred to is 10P, is 10 personnel. And anytime you're numbering personnel systems, the first number speaks to the number of running backs, and the second speaks to the number of tight ends. So if you're 10P, you're one running back, zero tight ends, which inherently means you have four receivers on the field. If you're 11P, it's one running back, one tight end, so three receivers on the field, and the math goes on. So, when you're a 10P football team, and whether the Y on this diagram, who would typically represent the tight end, whether he is a tight end body or a receiver body, when you present a 10P formation and you are spread out with four receivers, no tight end attached to the box, one running back, defensively, you try to get six guys in the box, and however you need to make that happen, you can either find a way to add an outside linebacker and rotate a safety, or you can try and bring a safety down into the box and let one of your outside linebacker, your star, your viper, your bandit, different defenses call them different things, but you can let them continue in part of the coverage structure. So, but with five offensive linemen in a five-man box, in theory, the offensive line can block everything. The run game is open. When you adjust as an offense and you go into what is known as 11P and you add a tight end to the box, the defense has to account a sixth defender to the box. And to be effective against the run, unless it's just a personnel difference, you have to find a way to add a seventh defender. So typically that's going to mean adding a safety. A lot of times it's going to be that safety that's to the strength or to the boundary. Actually, a lot of times the way a lot of modern coverages are played, this field outside backer or nickel is a player that's typically very versatile. You can do a lot of things, play a lot of games with him. And so you'll keep him a part of your coverage structure, and you might bring your boundary safety down and keep your other safety tall to the field. Or in the image that I have shown, where we've got two receivers to the left, one tight end, one receiver to the right, you might, as a defense, either keep the safety to the tight end down, or if it's a team that's giving you a lot of trouble from the field, you may bring that nickel from the field and actually rotate your coverage opposite of your tight end. But from a defensive structure standpoint, you are often going to want seven defenders part of your fit. Now, a team like Ole Miss, where the quarterback is a legitimate threat to run the ball, you are outnumbered. We, as an offense, can effectively block six, and we can read one of the defenders as well. So now, from an offensive standpoint, you have a true numerical advantage. So now, as a defense, we can account for everybody in this run play. I have to find a seventh defender from somewhere in order to match hats. At the end of the day, this game is always going to be about talent and numbers, right? Your talent. Real structure issues for a defense. Okay. If we transition from 11P to 12P and now add two tight ends. So the way, if you're listening, this is drawn up. I have two receivers to the left of the formation, and then a tight end and a wing, a second tight end, and a wing alignment to the right. So again, I've now added seven possible blockers and eight if I count the running back. So as a defense, at minimum, I need seven guys in the box, always with a goal to add to eight. So I think when a lot of people think and talk about, okay, it's two tight ends, then we're going to be in these big personnel packages, and it's going to be all about run. Well, if you're Ole Miss and the talent you have out wide is who you have, when they try to add an eighth and even at times maybe a ninth defender in the run fit, you create one-on-one situations outside. it's very difficult now to keep a safety. If this is, let's just say this is Trey Harris in the slot, okay, and this is whether it's Juice Wells or it's Watkins or it's Caden Lee, and however you want to sort the talent out in that receiver room, you're going to have trouble playing an effective bracket now and being sound in the run game unless you can create chaos with your movement or with the talent that you have. So being able to play with the two tight ends, while on paper and for a lot of people, it makes you think run, run, run. There's without a doubt advantages there. The other thing you do is you really can find ways to isolate your skill on the outside. You can create one-on-one matchups that if you were to go back into the spread world where it's 4 receivers on the field now, the coverage structure is completely different. Keeping safeties over the top is a lot easier, where now, because I'm forcing you as a defense to place numbers in the box, I'm creating one-on-one opportunities on the outside. And again, with the skill that Ole Miss has, that really puts you in a bind. Now, to take it a step further, we've seen Pigskin be effective split out as a wide receiver. We've seen him down the field. We've seen him underneath. We've seen him really wear a lot of hats and do a lot of things and be an every down player in the Ole Miss offense. When you add another tight end to the mix that, again, not the same player, but with maybe a little bit more dynamic skill set as a down the field speed guy, maybe not quite as polished in the run game. And so when you add that element, and now you can present it as a 12P team, and again, you can create a lot of structural issues. So if Caden Pigskin is your Y in the diagram that we're showing now, we've got 2 guys to the right, 2 guys to the left, with one of them being a tight end that's in a little wing position right off the tackle. If this is Pigskin to your left and this is right lined up at the H position in the slot to the right, a lot of defenses are going to base the personnel they have in the game based on the personnel that the offense has in the game. So if you are, Furman this coming Saturday and you see 2 tight ends on the field, a lot of times you are going to replace this field backer, this versatile nickel that does a lot of things in coverage, but can also be a part of your run fit. A lot of defenses are going to replace him with more of a true run player because they're expecting a tighter box. They're expecting, an offense that's going to present an extra run gap, and you need an extra run player, so you get the cover guy out, you get the box player in. Well, with the athleticism that Ole Miss has at the tight end position, you can line up now as an 11P or even a 10P structure offense with one tight end connected to the core, the other removed, or with both guys flexed out and removed. And defensively, you have to now, am I going to leave my cover guy in, where now I'm at a disadvantage when they add that tight end back to the core of the offense? Or am I going to leave my base in? I'm going to go back to a heavier personnel package, whether it's an extra defensive lineman, an extra linebacker, whatever it looks like in that scheme. And now when those guys flex out, then my coverage structure changes. I don't have the bodies on the field to maybe do some of the things that I want. So being versatile at that position can really unlock a lot of things for the Ole Miss offense. I don't necessarily think it's a place where we're going to live all the time. I don't think that that's all you're going to see because, again, there is so much talent in that room. I also think early in the season, you are going to play both of those tight ends as much as you can. And sometimes that's going to be on the field together, but also, early in the season, trying to keep them healthy, trying to get into conference play. You want them to still have some legs underneath them. So I think that when Ole Miss gets an opportunity to play with both of those two, whether they play like I showed here, where they're connected to the core and they're part of the run box, or whether you flex 1 or 2 of those guys out, and now you're asking a defense to make decisions with their own personnel. There's so many advantages that can be created. It's very easy for Ole Miss to start with either tight end out wide and then motion them in now to change the count in the run game, to change the fit for the defense. At the same time, whether there's one connected to the core and you add a second one late, again, you're changing the fit for the defense and you're making them make decisions about what is our personnel going to be, Are we going to try to match with size? Are we going to be comfortable playing our nickel or our sub package? And if you are not, if the versatility doesn't exist on your roster, and if that is not where you are most comfortable as a defense, it can really put you in a bind as a defensive coordinator, and it can make a team with that versatility at tight end very difficult to prepare for.
Let me ask you a question. I'm curious. You're an offensive coach. Project yourself to the college level a little bit here, and let's say you're at Ole Miss in these first 4 games, not taking anything away from the opponents, but let's get real. It's Furman, Middle Tennessee, Wake Forest, Georgia Southern. You can probably not show everything and get W's. You know Kentucky's watching. You know South Carolina's watching. LSU's watching, on and on. But especially Kentucky, South Carolina. Do you want to put a lot on film so that when those weeks roll around, the defensive coordinator is kind of stressed trying to show everybody a lot? Or do you want to preserve as much as you can so that you have the power of surprise a little bit? If I'm not sure I asked that question exactly right, but I think you generally get the gist of it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Everybody kind of has a little bit different take on how they're going to handle that. One of the nice things about Ole Miss, and one of, I think, the beauties in what Lane Kiffin does is he has a core system of plays, a core series of plays that are always going to be there in every single game that they play, and how they get to them, how they window dress them by formation, with motion, with personnel, is part of the art and kind of the beauty in what he does offensively as a play designer. And so in some ways, there's not much to hide, right? Because in a lot of ways we do what we do. And then, the other piece of that is the other thing outside of those maybe 8 to 10 core hang our hat on concepts. They do a great job of finding wrinkles every game to attack certain structures. And so are there some things that they'll probably preserve? Yeah, a little bit. But I think in a lot of ways, you're just going to see them go out and do what they do because they want to be crisp. They want to move at a fast tempo. They want to get in and out of their personnel packages. They want to get into their motions. They want to run their RPOs. They would love, I'm sure, to be up and get to a point where they can just hand the ball off, and whether they show the RPO and tell the quarterback not to throw it, or they don't even show it at all. In a perfect world, they get to that point late in these early games. But at the end of the day, you have to make sure everybody's on the same page. You have to make sure that all the communication and all the execution is there. And so there's a little bit of a fine line, I think. One of the things that I'm most interested in seeing early in the season for Ole Miss is how they use or choose not to use Jackson Dart in the run game.
Me too.
He is such an effective runner. Going back and watching that bowl game, there were times where he's so comfortable in the read system that they use, that he's so quick and adept at it not only making the read, but getting the ball out of his hand and protecting himself. And early in his career, and even early last year, they had to kind of train him a little bit, I think, to protect himself at times. And he is, say what you want about the kid, and it's not, I'm not the one to answer questions about professional and is he going to be a guy and that stuff at the next level. The one thing I think you have to say about the kid is he is an elite competitor.
Oh,
and he
almost to a fault
to win, and absolutely almost to a fault.
Yeah.
And so, from that standpoint, it's,
and I mean that positively. I just, when people say, what do you mean? I'm like,
listen, because if you give him 10 opportunities to read it against Furman, and it comes down to the game being on the line, he's going to call his number because he believes in himself and he wants to win that bad. And so,
and he got hurt last year doing that. He called his own number against Arkansas and got banged up pretty good, and was never really physically the same player the rest of the way. And so it's that deal of yeah, you have this willing runner, you have this able runner, but you need him as the leader of your team. You need him as the voice in the huddle. You need him as the voice in the locker room, and you need him as the primary passer on your team with all those
Yeah,
receivers.
and a lot of times I think you would say how much you see them use him in the run game is a reflection of how much trust they have in the backup quarterback situation. I don't think that's the case this year. Whether they choose to run him or not has nothing to do with the trust they have in the backup quarterback situation. And that's not one I have enough opinion on because I haven't seen enough. I just know what everybody tells me. But I think with him, it's not about okay, we don't want to get in the situation where we're having to play our backup because I do think they have some faith there, from what I hear, which who knows. But it's about this is your guy, this is your leader, this is the guy that from the outside, he's the one standing in front of the crowd, raising the hand when it needs to be raised, and so if that's the case, you have to feed him a little bit. But at the same time, how necessary is it to run him?
Pete is a guy who started, if I'm doing my math correctly, 30 games between USC and Ole Miss, almost all of those at Ole Miss, but he did start 5 or 6 games at SC, his true freshman season. So, I mean, you have the commodity that you can't go buy in terms of experience, right? You have this guy.
Absolutely.
And now he's in his 3rd season with Lane Kiffin, his 3rd season with Charlie Weiss, his 3rd season in Oxford, his 3rd season with a lot of those offensive linemen, with some of his guys. That is invaluable. And in a world where, and I think this is Ole Miss, right? I mean, in a world where what's the goal? Well, the goal is to make the playoff, which means the goal is to win the national championship. If that is your goal, then protecting his health is of paramount importance. And so I agree with you. I think there were times last season where his competitiveness got the best of him and he took off and he lowered his shoulder and he's like, I'm going to take this guy on. And people go, oh, I get it. There's a moment for that, but that moment's not all the time. And I think that's maybe the next step in his growth. But you don't have, it's where I go back to the Quinshon thing. You don't have Quinshon Judkins back there who over the last 2 years, I mean, I think 2 years ago you could argue that Rocket Sanders at Arkansas, who's now at South Carolina, was the best back in the league. Last season, you could argue that the kid at Missouri was the best back in the league. But if you do over 2 years, it's inarguable. It's inarguable. Quinshon Judkins was the best back in the league. And so you've got to replace that production, and I think it's important for Jackson Dart not to put all of that on his shoulders. And he's the kind of guy who I think it's just the way he's wired that it's a temptation for him to put that all on his shoulders and go, hey, everybody get on. I'm going to carry you.
Absolutely. And if there is a concern as an Ole Miss fan early in the season, I think with some shuffling up front on the offensive line, with replacing an extremely talented tailback and trying to figure out what that rotation is going to look like. If there are situations early in the season where you're not running the ball as effectively as you would like to without your quarterback read game, Ole Miss will turn to that when they need it.
Yeah.
What you don't want to see is them turning to that too often in games that all games matter. That's especially with the end goal being what it is for this Ole Miss football team. Every game matters. But in games that you should win outright, you want to see that be a piece of the offense and not be a big part of the offense. And I think that's the one thing that from a fan perspective in your head, it's okay. How many times has he called run the ball now? How many times? Because if you're seeing a lot of that, then in my opinion, it probably means they're not satisfied with how they're running the ball without that element in the offense.
Yeah, I'll tell you that privately, everybody's pretty excited about what they've seen in the running game over the course of August. It's just people like me who understand how good Judkins was. I was kind of pleased to hear Kiffin use the word elite running back, referring to Quinshon on Monday. There's obviously some ill will is probably too strong of a term, but there's some stuff there. There's some emotion there. And for him to use that term, I was like, yeah, that's right. I mean, you've got to replace an elite back. Let me ask you this. You're a coach. I'm curious, just kind of get inside your head a little bit. You were at Ole Miss at a time when Ole Miss was trying to be relevant. And they were pretty relevant with Deuce and Romero and those guys. This preseason, I've been on this beat for a long time, and I've told people this, that I've always noticed that Ole Miss gets a lot of juice out of nobody respects us. Nobody believes in us. It's us against the world. No one thinks we're good. You can't realistically use that this year. I mean, you can, I guess, if you want. It's sort of disingenuous when everyone on College game day on week 0 is picking you to make the playoff, except Kirk Herbstreit, who I think has you as the first team out. I mean, that's, if you're going for disrespect, you're getting disrespect in scraps. You know what I mean? I mean, you're not getting a lot of disrespect. Is that a thing that internally you've got to work around to go, hey, we've got to motivate in a different way?
Yeah, I mean, listen, it started early. I mean, it started before the end of the season last year with the rat poison, from Kiffin. He knew it was coming. He knew it had the possibility to be there, right? If they were able to hold on to certain pieces and add certain pieces. He knew what realistically was potentially ahead. And so I think it started there because it is a balance of tempering expectation, so that the big head doesn't exist, but there's also a level of you want supreme confidence. I think the reality is being a part of good football programs and when you go watch elite programs operate, and I've been fortunate. I've been able to attend some elite programs, college practices, talk to a ton of college coaches and talk to a ton of players about what the experience has been like for them. And the reality is, for most players, it doesn't matter if you're at Alabama or Ohio State or Ole Miss or Georgia or wherever. For most players, there is still something to prove, because if you're Georgia's roster, you might be the guy, but the guy behind you he's pretty damn close to being the guy. But with level of expectation on the outside also raises level of expectation on the inside. And so I think that maybe losing the chip on your shoulder from being the something to prove or the counted out, maybe just transitions into, this was our goal, but we haven't actually done it, and it's so different now, and just different in general with the way that the portal works and the incoming of players. But you don't bring in some of the guys they bring in, one, without the Grove Collective. I mean, that's a reality, right? But you also, they could have gotten similar money other places, but they chose here because they thought choosing Ole Miss was an opportunity to go be on a big stage. And so, yeah, has the conversation changed? Is it a different job for the coaching staff? Absolutely. But I think personally, I would much rather operate from a standpoint of, hey, this is the expectation. This is your goal. Let's go work for it. Than I would from the, hey, we're close, guys. We're almost there. People are counting us out. Let's go prove them wrong. Without a doubt. Hey, they say we're elite. Let's go be elite.
I'm going to do one last thing with you before we go. I'm going to pick your brain on the rest of the SEC just in general real quick as we get started. But before I do that, Pete, I know that you probably like Wendy's nugs. You like them dipped in sauce, but have you had them covered in sauce, Pete? I bet you haven't.
Sounds delicious.
Wendy's new saucy nugs take the crispy and spicy nugs you love and they turn them up to 11. Choose between flavors like buffalo, honey barbecue, garlic parm, or if you're a real heat seeker, Pete seems like a heat seeker, Try spicy ghost pepper only on Wendy's signature nugs. I dare you. That's 7 delicious ways to try the nugs you already love. Pick a flavor, grab some extra napkins, prepare to nug like you've never nugged before. For a whole new way to nug, it's got to be Wendy's. That's at participating U.S. Wendy's. And we're brought to you by this show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Oh, what's something you'd love to learn as an adult? Do you make time to learn new things as often as you'd like, or was that lost in childhood? Kids are always learning and growing, but as adults, sometimes we lose that curiosity. What's something you'd like to learn? Is it gardening, a new language? Maybe you want to become a better bowler, perhaps? Therapy can help you reconnect with your sense of wonder because your back to school era can come at any age. I've benefited from therapy. It's helpful for learning positive coping skills, how to set boundaries. It empowers you to be the best version of yourself. It isn't just for those who've experienced major trauma. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapist anytime for no additional charge. Rediscover your curiosity with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/MPW today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/MPW. All right, so everyone's talking about the Rebels. Obviously, people are talking about Georgia, Alabama, Missouri, LSU, Oklahoma, Texas A&M. It's a loaded league. There's some teams at the kind of the quote bottom of the league that some people, self-included, are like curious about. Kentucky, for example. When you sort of look at the league a little bit from your perspective there, what interests you moving into week one?
I'll say this up front, and I would imagine a lot of people feel the same way. As somebody who loves college football, but doesn't have the time and opportunity to follow it as closely as I honestly would like to. One thing the NIL era has done is it's made it difficult to keep up with rosters.
Yeah.
Rosters turn over so much more. It's made it hard for me to really have a strong opinion on a lot of these teams right now because I haven't seen them. Because, when it was a signing class hitting every February, that was easy for me to follow. Right now, Georgia's going to be good because Georgia has a ton of good players coming back from a really damn good football team. Yeah. Texas is going to be good because they have a ton of good football players coming back from a really damn good football team. I can't tell you who all Alabama lost and who all Alabama got back. I know everybody's talking about Alabama. I know, you have a quarterback that found some success last year and is a really special athlete, but I don't know if he fits in that system. I don't know how that system that's coming from Washington changes to fit him. I don't know enough about the pieces around him to know what they look like. And so, I'll be honest, in a lot of ways, it's hard for me to stamp or just cross anybody off the list right now. And that's just part of the seismic shift of rosters in this day and age of college football. All that being said, I do think there are those kind of upper tier teams that we expect to be upper tier. I think that middle of the pack. I mean, look, Kentucky is going to be a well-coached football team. They are every year. There is some intrigue there on that roster. I know how the quarterback position has changed. That they're going to be interesting. I'm honestly curious to see what Texas A&M looks like. New coaching staff. A lot of roster turnover from everything I know. Curious to see what they look like. He did a great job at Duke. And now he's trying to come back and probably right the ship is what he would tell you, based on what's going on in the past in College Station. And so, there's still talent on that roster and there's still the money to build a good, talented roster. So curious to see how they look. I'm really curious in Arkansas. I'm really curious to see what that roster looks like.
New quarterback, Bobby Petrino is the OC, where Pittman's going to give him the keys and go for it. Yeah, it's totally different than what Petrino got at A&M, where Jimbo was like, well, here's the car, but I'm not giving you the keys.
Absolutely. Paterno was riding shotgun.
Yeah.
If we wanted to be funny, we could say he was on the back of the motorcycle this time, right?
Yeah.
But he's on the front of the motorcycle.
He's driving the motorcycle
right?
this
He's
time.
driving it now.
It might crash, but he's driving it, right?
Can't tell you who's riding behind him, right? None of my business. But yeah, there's no question that offense is going to look entirely different than what it's looked like in the past. It is a new quarterback. There's some other new skill players around them. Sam Pittman's always done well recruiting offensive linemen. Change at O-line coach there on that roster.
You got young quarterbacks like Jackson Arnold at Oklahoma, Lenoris, is it Jenkins? Lenoris Jenkins at South Carolina. There's just it's interesting. It's a fascinating league.
It's so deep, and part of that is the inclusion now of Texas and Oklahoma.
Yeah,
but even removed, you're still looking at such a deep league. And we always say that about the SEC, but you have new coaches that are taking over and trying to turn programs around. You have coaches on the hot seat. If you're in Gainesville, if you're in Gainesville, if you're in South Carolina, if you're in Fayetteville, you absolutely have to produce.
Yeah.
And it's going to be hard to do this year, And so, I'm very, very curious to see how the middle third of the league shakes out this year.
I am too, because I think that's where things get decided, because the middle third of the league is going to be the portion of the league that gets to play spoiler.
Absolutely. That's the part of the league where you might be an 11-win team and your wins don't look very impressive. It also might be, the part of the league where you're an 11-win team, and because you beat that middle team who happened to upset somebody else, your wins suddenly look a lot better. We're in a whole new, from the way the play clock is being run in college football, and I think that's something you and Tyler talked about a little bit, recently, to the playoff system obviously being a new era of football.
The way fans cheer, right? The way fans cheer, because like in just the old days, meaning last year, if you're an Ole Miss fan, for example, like Sunday night, you want USC to kick LSU's ass. Now you don't.
No.
Next weekend, you take great pleasure in watching Arkansas get beat by 3 touchdowns at Oklahoma State. Now, you don't.
No.
You want Florida beat Miami.
You don't want those QR codes. You don't want the QR codes on the back of the Oklahoma State helmets to get much use that night.
No, because here's the thing. Because one of two things happens when you Ole Miss play LSU, Arkansas, Florida. You either win or you lose, right? And if you win, you want that win to be big.
It's got to be a quality win.
Happens to be the night that you stumble, you don't want it to be crippling. It's Absolutely. Much different to lose to, I'll use Arkansas as an example. I probably shouldn't, because I'll get beat up for it. You're better off losing to what an Arkansas team that ends up 8-4 than an Arkansas team that ends up 4-8. A 4-8 Arkansas loss, and you're disqualified. An 8-4 Arkansas loss, and you might survive it if you have a win over LSU and Oklahoma or a win over Georgia. It's that kind of thing. It's a completely different mindset going into a 12-team playoff. It's kind of like, I always say this in basketball, right? When you're an SEC basketball fan, whatever team you cheer for, we'll use Ole Miss as an example. In the non-con portion of the league, you want the rest of the league, literally everybody, to dominate, to get all Absolutely. The non-con wins you can get, so that, the net rating is so high, so that if you stumble in Columbia or if you stumble in Starkville, it doesn't really matter, because they have a high RPI and a high net. It doesn't affect you. You're fine. What you don't want is 2 or 3 of those basketball teams to be so crappy that their net is a 200, and then you go there on a weird Tuesday night and you lose, and that's what knocks you out of the tournament. It's kind of that mentality comes into football for really the first time ever.
Well, and you say that, and it immediately in my head, in the past few seasons, getting 2 SEC teams into the playoffs, into the Final Four, whatever, they're 2 of the best teams in the country they're in, right? Now it's about being in the top 12. And just like you said, your strength of schedule, we talk every year around March. How many SEC teams are they going to let in?
Yeah.
That's always part of the discussion, and it's not going to be any different. You're going to be in a deep league, and we know the Big Ten is going to have, possibly two teams the right way it shakes out, maybe, a third, whatever. But you look at the distribution of the spots and you look at what's actually available. And if you're not going to be the SEC champion or you're not going to be the SEC runner up, you need every win on your schedule to be a quality win.
Yep. 100%. All right. We'll wrap there as we'll look forward to next week. Ole Miss and Middle Tennessee. I think it's a mid-afternoon game in Oxford against the Blue Raiders. So we'll look ahead to Middle Tennessee next week when we get together. Don't forget, we've been brought to you by Meadowbrook Wealth Advisors of Raymond James. You can get in touch with those guys at ryan.geary@raymondjames.com and get into also 601-368-2215. And Pete, look forward to next week after Ole Miss and Furman. It'll be Ole Miss and Middle Tennessee State as we get into the second week of the season. We'll have some Ole Miss film to look at, get an idea of what the Rebels look like after week one, and we'll get ready for week two. Pete, thanks.
Absolutely. Take care.
For Pete DeWeese, I'm Neil McCready. We'll be back with you again next week. Stay tuned. We'll have hand raised guys following this if you're watching in the live stream, and we'll make this a podcast. An audio podcast as well. So be careful if you're driving this weekend. Enjoy the first big full weekend of college football. We'll talk to you again next week. Until then, take care.